It was the rehearsal dinner. I arrived 15 minutes early like I always do. The parking lot behind the event hall was mostly empty, save for a catering truck and a woman arranging flowers by the entrance. I took a breath, checked the ribbon on the gift bag beside me, and stepped out of the car. The bag was light inside, was a scrapbook I'd spent 3 weeks making. Family recipes pressed petals from our old garden pictures of Madeline in every birthday dress I ever sewed. I had tucked a short letter in the front pocket. Just a few lines. Nothing dramatic. I reached the front doors and froze. Taped to the glass was a sheet of paper, printed in color. My face. A photo I barely remembered being taken. My smile was small eyes looking just off-center. And above it, in thick capital letters, "Do not let this woman in." The woman arranging flowers didn't look up, but the security guard, young maybe mid-20s, shifted his stance when he saw me. He turned to check the sign, then looked back at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are you Odessa Linwood?" I didn't answer. I just looked at the photo again as if by staring at it long enough it might dissolve. "I'm really sorry," he said, lowering his voice. "I was told, I can't let you past the entrance." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood what it meant. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back the way I came, past the parking lot, past the music warming up inside, past the bride's name on a welcome board that had no mention of her mother. The gift stayed in my hands the whole way. I sat in the car windows, up engine off. From here, I could still see the doors, the paper, the people arriving, one by one. I didn't cry. I just sat there until the sun dipped below the roofline. Then I drove home. The bag was still on the passenger seat when I opened my front door. That morning, I ironed the olive green dress my daughter once called timeless. She was 17 then, borrowing my heels for a school debate, and paused at the doorway to say it. I remembered the way she looked at me, half teasing, half admiring. I held on to that tone while I pressed the fabric careful with the sleeves. I tied my hair back the way she used to say, made me look less like a teacher, more like a magazine ad. I hadn't heard anything directly from her. No invitation, no call. But a cousin had forwarded a message last week, rehearsal dinner, 6 p.m. Larkhall Vineyards. It wasn't an invitation. It was a breadcrumb. I took it. I wrapped the gift carefully twice. First in tissue paper, then in craft paper with a wax seal. The scrapbook had taken me weeks. I stitched the spine myself. Each page held something from our lives, our kitchen, our yard, her first day of school, her last summer before college. The pressed petals were from the rose bush her father planted the year she was born. I didn't write much. Just a short letter at the front, for Madeline on the day she begins something new. Love, Mom. I arrived with my heart steady. Not expectant. Not bitter. Just steady. I knew she might not want me front and center. I didn't expect speeches or to be introduced, but I thought maybe I'd at least get a seat in the back. A plate. A look. I didn't get a look. I got a photo of myself on the door. Now, standing in the hallway of my quiet house, I looked down at the bag still in my hands. The seal was smudged from the heat of my palm. I walked to the table and placed it there, like setting something down for later. I walked to the back of the house, into the room that still smelled like his cologne, faint and tucked into the corners. My husband's office had become a kind of museum since he passed. Nothing dramatic, just undisturbed. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. There, in a manila folder labeled M Wedding, were the 3 contracts I signed nearly 6 months ago. One for the vineyard, one for the caterer, one for a local photographer whose portfolio Madeline had once raved about. All with my name, all with my signature, all still active. They had removed me from the moment, but not the structure. No one had ever asked to change the name on the paperwork. No one had transferred billing. No one had bothered to check the fine print. I sat down slowly and read through each one line by line. Deadlines, penalties, contacts. My name still holding everything up like a beam in a roof they'd painted over. I closed the folder and set it on my lap. When Madeline first told me she didn't want a small-town wedding, I understood. She'd always dreamed bigger than the county lines we lived inside. She wanted vineyards, soft lights, a place that looked like it belonged in a bridal magazine. I didn't have much to offer in terms of luxury, but I could help her reach for the image she wanted. So when she hesitated over the cost 6 months ago, I stepped in. "I'll cover the deposits," I told her. "You can pay whatever's left after." She hugged me so tight that day I could feel her heartbeat against mine. That was the last time she hugged me with any warmth. There was no prenup to consider, no talks about who pays for what. Just a daughter planning her future, and a mother wanting to ease the weight of it. I signed the contracts without a second thought. My name, my accounts, my steady handwriting on each dotted line. I didn't do it to control anything. I never meant to own her wedding. I only wanted to support it. But a few weeks later, the first sign appeared. An automated email from the venue bounced back, recipient no longer valid. I called, and the new coordinator answered. She introduced herself. Politely explained that she had taken over communication with the bride and groom. No mention of me. Then the catering company stopped sending me updates. A different email had replaced mine on the distribution list. Again, no mention of me. It was as if they had peeled me from the edges of the planning, quietly, neatly, as though I were tape they no longer needed. The only thing they forgot was the part that mattered, the contracts. My name hadn't been removed. My responsibility hadn't been transferred. I was still the foundation beneath the celebration they didn't want me to attend. I set the folder on the table and smoothed its edges, feeling a calm settle into my chest. If they didn't want my presence, they would have to decide how much they wanted my signature. By midnight, the house had gone still. The kind of quiet that makes every decision feel heavier, more deliberate. I carried the gift out to the porch, the night air cool against my skin. The scrapbook sat on the small wooden table beside the old planter, its edges neat, its ribbon intact. I untied the ribbon slowly, careful not to tear anything. Habit, I suppose. Even now I handled it the way I handled everything for her, with gentleness she no longer recognized. When I opened the cover, the letter I'd written stared back at me. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt when I wrote it. "To my daughter, on your beginning, from the woman who gave you yours." I read it once more. Then I closed the book. A box of matches sat on the porch shelf, left over from last summer's candles. I struck one, the flame trembling for a moment before it steadied. I touched it to the corner of the scrapbook. The paper caught quickly, faster than I expected. A bright edge, then a curl. The flames moved inward, folding the pages as they blackened, touching each memory as if claiming them. I stood there until the last page crumbled into ash. There was no grief, just an exhale. Inside, the house felt colder than the porch. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the landline, and made the first call. The coordinator answered with her professional brightness. I gave her the sentence I had practiced silently in the car. "The person responsible for this booking has decided not to proceed." I heard her inhale to ask a question, but I hung up before she could form the words. The second call was to the catering manager, the third to the photographer. Each time the same phrase. Each time, no explanation. When I set the phone down, the contracts folder was still waiting on the table where I'd left it. Its presence felt different, now lighter, somehow. Tomorrow, they would learn what silence could undo. By 8 in the morning, the calls started. The first was the venue manager, polite, confused, slightly nervous. "Just confirming the cancellation request came directly from you, Ms. Linwood." I told him yes. He thanked me, said a partial refund would be processed within 5 to 7 business days. He didn't ask why. The florist followed soon after. Then the catering company. Each one confirmed cancellation. Each one used the same phrase per your authorization. It moved like clockwork. Smooth, clean, final. By 10, I'd stopped answering. I let the calls ring out one after the next until the phone sat quietly on the kitchen counter, buzzing now and then with texts. One came from my cousin, the one who'd forwarded me the date in the first place. What happened? I read it once, then turned the phone face down. The gift was gone. Burned. The contracts were no longer mine to carry. There was nothing left to explain. I wiped the counter, refolded the dish towel, opened the windows to let the morning air drift through. Outside, a few birds flitted around the feeder, chirping like any other day. The sky didn't look any different, and yet something had shifted. At noon, I took the phone from the counter, opened the drawer near the pantry, and placed it inside. Then I closed the drawer softly. That silence, it wasn't empty. It was a border. I didn't light candles. I didn't play music. I just let the stillness spread through the house, through my shoulders, through the corners of a life that had for too long been asked to shrink. They would notice soon. The flowers would never arrive. The tables would stay bare. The music would fade before it began. I didn't need to be there to see it. The unraveling had already begun. They arrived in waves, heels clicking across gravel suits, pressed laughter rising in expectation. The vineyard had been dressed beautifully the night before. I remembered the string lights looped across the terrace, the soft music drifting through the vines. But this morning, nothing stirred. No centerpieces, no tablecloths, no chairs. Guests stood awkwardly, clutching small purses, looking around like they'd walked into the wrong dream. I wasn't there, but I knew how it would unfold. Madeline would step out from the side room in soft ivory silk veil still pinned in place. She would expect to see rows of white chairs, her name printed on delicate cards, the sound of the quartet tuning up. Instead, she saw absence. No flowers, no food, no servers. Just a few folding chairs leaned against the back wall, left over from another event. I imagined the confusion tightening around her mouth, the way she'd glance toward her maid of honor, searching for someone to fix it. Her groom's parents would shift uncomfortably, voices lowering. A cousin would whisper, "Did something happen with the vendor?" Then someone would say it. Not loud, but clear enough. "Wasn't your mother paying for all this?" And then silence, because no one would have an answer. She had erased me from the invitations, from the table plans, from the ceremony. But she hadn't erased the truth. They would look to her, and she would say nothing. Because what could she say? That her mother, her quiet, ever-predictable mother, had simply stepped back. That the woman she'd reduced to a warning sign had been holding every contract, every deposit, every piece. I sat in my kitchen, a mug cooling in my hands, listening to nothing in particular. Somewhere across town, a wedding was collapsing inward, not from spite, not from sabotage, but from the weight of a name they thought didn't matter. By early afternoon, their calls started again. My phone buzzed from inside the drawer, muffled and persistent. But I didn't move to open it. I could imagine Madeline standing near the terrace door's veil, slipping bouquet drooping in her hand as she waited for me to pick up. She would try twice, maybe 3 times, before switching to texts, short, frantic ones she hoped would pull me back into place. But every call went to voicemail, and every message stayed unread. At the venue, the unraveling picked up speed. The photographer, after pacing the gravel path for nearly an hour, finally packed his lenses into their velvet-lined case. The DJ unplugged the last cable, coiling it neatly, before carting his equipment back to the van. Without chairs, without flowers, without any sign of food, the guests' conversations turned thin and uneasy. A few relatives left quietly, offering awkward squeezes on Madeline's arm, before slipping to their cars. They had dressed beautifully, planned their travel. taken time off work, yet there was nothing to witness. Nothing to celebrate. The groom's mother, impatient and sharp-tongued on her best days, began pressing for explanations. Why wasn't anything prepared? Who had confirmed the vendors? Who was responsible? Her voice carried across the terrace, cutting through the murmurs. I could almost hear the edge in it from where I sat, miles away. Madeline would stand there, unable to answer. Her hands would tremble around the bouquet petals, falling one by one to the floor. She might try to redirect blame onto the coordinator, onto the vendors, onto the system. But every excuse would collapse under the weight of what she knew. Eventually, she sank onto one of the unattended folding chairs, the only piece of furniture left in the room. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, the carefully set curls slipping from their pins. She held the bouquet in her lap, like a burden instead of a symbol. Someone, maybe a distant cousin, maybe a curious guest, raised a phone and snapped a photo. The shutter sound echoed lightly, marking the moment the celebration became something else entirely. And somewhere in that scattered crowd, the whispers began to shift toward the one question none of them could answer. 2 days after the wedding, that wasn't a courier arrived at Madeline's apartment just before noon. The envelope was hand-delivered, no return address, no message on the outside. Just her name written in calm, slanted script. Inside, she found no letter, no apology, no accusation. Just a neat stack of papers. Copies of the venue agreement, the catering invoice, the photography contract, all bearing my signature, all canceled under the same name they tried to pretend no longer mattered. Each document was marked with a red stamp void, and on top of the stack, a single yellow post-it note. My handwriting again. Nothing more than a sentence: you made your choice. So did I. Oh, no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. Not anymore. There were no speeches left to give, no apologies left to beg for, and certainly no explanations left to demand. The truth had been woven into the paperwork. She just hadn't looked for it until it was too late. I don't know what she did after that, whether she sat with it or threw it away, whether she read every line or crumpled it in her hand. But I know the sound it must have made inside her chest, the weight of a silence she never thought I could carry, because I had always been the soft one, the one who answered too quickly, forgave, too often stayed too long in rooms I was no longer welcome in. I had made myself small for her joy, quiet for her comfort. But silence, I'd learned, is not weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. That afternoon, I sat in my garden pulling weeds from between the tomato rows. The sun warmed my shoulders. A bird landed on the fence post nearby, then fluttered off again. When I came inside, I washed my hands, dried them carefully, and opened the drawer beside the stove. Inside sat a small tin of keepsakes, paper clips, extra stamps, an old key I didn't remember. I added one final item to the box. The smell of bread filled the kitchen by mid-morning. I'd started the dough before the sun came up, letting it rise while I swept the back porch and watered the basil that had somehow survived the summer. I didn't rush the process. I folded it gently, let it rest, and watched it turn golden in the oven, the way I used to watch her sleep when she was a child, quietly from the doorway, with nothing but hope in my hands. When it was done, I set a single plate at the table, not in the corner, not as an afterthought, in the center. A cloth napkin, a small dish of butter, 1 glass of water. I sliced a piece of the warm loaf, placed it on the plate, and sat down. No occasion. Just a meal. For me. Afterward, I pulled my old gardening book from the shelf. The spine was cracked, pages dotted with scribbles and little stars where I'd marked things over the years. I turned, slowly stopping on a chapter about regrowth. Perennials that return. The title read. I underlined it, then added a small note in the margin. So do women. The phone buzzed once from the drawer. Just once. I opened it and saw a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. You didn't have to go that far. No name. But I didn't need one. I typed slowly. You already did. Then I hit send, locked the screen, and returned the phone to the drawer without another glance. Somewhere, someone might have been waiting for a response, or maybe not. It didn't matter. The point wasn't whether they'd reach back, it was that I no longer needed to reach first. I rinsed the plate, folded the cloth napkin, and let the warm scent of bread linger in the air a little longer. There were no more questions left to ask. Only space, only stillness, and the quiet bloom of something finally beginning again.